Hello everyone and welcome to our Waterline Pro tutorial for Unreal Engine 5. In this short video we're going to go over the ocean simulation aspect. Now in our previous video we talked a lot about the water materials and how we can make it look really nice and shiny, and you can find those settings over here under water surface material, and this is pretty much the stuff that we went over. Now these have to do mainly with the appearance of the water surface, how it reacts to light, and so on and so forth. But right now we just wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about these settings, and these control the FFT simulation. So FFT simulation is what is generating all of these waves. These are based on physical parameters like wind strength, wind direction, a new one, wind contribution, which you might not have at the moment, but this is coming in our latest update for Unreal Engine 5 Waterline Pro 5.1. The way that FFT simulation works is basically it takes all of these parameters and it grabs them in a certain area. For example, we have simulation scale of 1000 over here. We could change that to say 500. And to preview our ocean in the editor, we just need to hit Live Ocean. And now we could see that we have changed the scale of the ocean. But traditionally, when we do that, we also need to bring about the wave amplitude. Now an easy way to think about this is that this is the wave height, but at the simulation stage. Slightly lower, we have wave height and wave choppiness, and these modify the wave height after the simulation stage. Now, these are very useful for fine-tuning the water and get it to look just right. And as we've shown in a previous video, sometimes we are restricted by the amplitude we could use during certain settings, and these two parameters here basically help us overcome that. Right now we have changed the simulation scale to 500, and we will also need to change the amplitude a little bit. We should probably increase it to 3, maybe 3.5 or 5 until we start seeing something that we like, much like before. Now, after that, we have the FFT resolution, and this basically controls the quality at which our ocean is being rendered. Now, in a lot of cases, the maximum resolution of 1K texture is a little too high, for example, for games. And let's just see what happens when we drop it to 520 and hit Live Ocean. Now, almost nothing has changed except our ocean went really blocky for some reason. And that is because we also need to change the settings and the size for our render targets. Now, to do that, we just need to double click on the colored one, and we see our 5_RT ocean height, and we need to change the size X and Y for these ones to be identical to our FFT resolution. So 512, 512. We can close it now, and we could see that it's starting to look a bit better now. A great deal of the text of the little blocky pixels, if you will, have disappeared, but we still do get a little bit of blockiness. Our waves aren't looking very smooth, and that is because we also need to change the resolution for our normal texture. So let's open this one now. Now, a great rule for this that we have found is to actually have it double your current resolution. So in this case, 1K. And when you change it, your ocean will go completely flat, but don't worry, once you hit Live Ocean, everything will be back to normal. Now we're still getting some blocks here, and this is because we also need to change one last setting, and that is the FFT normal texel size. Now this sort of controls the way that the normal texture is being filtered. So for 1K, value of 5, the default one, is pretty good. For 512, we should probably double this to 10 as well. So let's do that, hit Live Ocean. You could change these parameters on the fly, by the way, but just to make things a bit clearer, we're pausing the simulation here. So at 10, we can see that things are looking pretty good. And overall, you're not going to see too much of a difference between 512 and 1K, depending on your tiling. If you're using like a low tile like 5000 or even 3000, you're pretty much not going to see any difference in the FFT resolution. But calculating a 512 texture is a lot cheaper than the full-on 1K. So it's just something to keep in mind, and this is basically how you would go about changing it. But in some cases, you might see that right now we have probably lost a little bit of the sharpness due to the resolution change. Well, this is where our other parameters come in handy, like wave height and wave choppiness. So right now we can just increase the wave choppiness to something like 10. You could see that our waves are now getting nice and sharp again. Maybe a little bit too sharp because, let's pause it. We could see a little bit of a, basically this is like a bug where the mesh will fold in on itself, and this is not a great thing. This is traditionally where foam would happen, and well, foam is happening over here, but in this case it's also a bit of a visual artifact. Now to fix that, we just need to lower the choppiness to something like 8, and let's go to live ocean. We're still getting a little bit of them, so maybe 7.5, and we're now looking pretty good with nice sharp waves and no artifacts. Now there is actually another way to get rid of them if we really want to get that look, and that is, let's go back to our choppiness and set that to 10. Live ocean, and maybe I just set it to something really high. Yeah, perfect. Now we have a nice big line that we could see over here, and this is actually the underside of this ocean mesh that we could see right now. Well, to work our way around that, we can simply just turn it off. So if we go to our waterline settings, water surface material, we could close out our render target, and let's just go two-sided material, and we're gonna turn off the two-sided normals. This is like a couple of extra functions that happen when we're using the two-sided material. Things are gonna calculate for a little bit, and there we go. Now we could see that our ocean is full. We're still getting that sort of break, but it's no longer as glaringly obvious as before, and at even the slightest of distance, the issue pretty much goes away. Now the trade-off in this sort of technique approach to the problem is that now when we go underwater, we no longer have our underwater surface. Now to do that, we can go back to our underwater mesh settings and just hit underwater surface enabled, and there we go. This spawns in a separate underwater surface with its own underwater surface material, and these are its parameters. There will be another video exploring underwater visuals slightly later on in the series, but for now this sort of ties to the overall appearance of the ocean, how to get nice visuals above and below as well. Next up, let's go back to our live ocean and just disable the underwater surface, because there is a bit of a performance cost with this approach. The most efficient way is the one we've currently set up by default, just using the overall surface water material with these two enabled for above and below water. But for now, let's just disable them. And let's just start going over a bit more of these parameters. So we have, up next is the wind speed. Now this controls, well, the wind speed. And what this does is stronger wind speed creates larger swells, while lower speeds produce smaller, more evenly made up waves. Now a cool way to actually work with these parameters, if you want to have the ocean both static and actually see the preview, is that we could actually set up the wave speed to something really low, like 0.01. And now you can see that our ocean is technically simulating, but at an ultra low speed that we cannot perceive. So now we can start messing with our wind speed, and we can see a bit better of what's going on. Now, past a certain point, we need to remember that all of these simulations are being tied up with our foam. And because our ocean isn't moving at all, a lot of foam is being generated on the same spot without it being decayed or killed off. So if we want to get identical visuals, we might need to increase the foam decay a bit. So something like 10. Yeah, this is pretty good for a static ocean, because basically, again, foam is being created in the same spot over and over and over and over again without the sort of mask that would generate the foam being moved. So this is what will cause it to always appear stronger than it would be when the ocean is static with this particular method. Once you're done with your setup, we can just pretty much revert to whatever value we had before and things would be okay. So once we have this, we have wave amplitude, which we kind of discussed what it does before, but we can lower it, increase it to something like 0.5, 0.8. Now when we go to a value that is way too high for our render targets to handle, we start seeing these pits. And these sort of are out of bounds values, but these are not something that we are too worried about. So the way to get about this is say, well, we really like the ocean of this particular state with the size of the waves and everything. So what we're going to do is drop this down value to something like 5. We're going to look around and make sure that we don't see any of these sort of pits or flat plateaus at the top of the waves. And what we're going to do is modify the wave height here. This is after the simulation. So we can go to something like 10. Okay, this was maybe a little bit too extreme. 7, that's pretty good. And well, the choppiness is pretty good at 15, but maybe we can go even crazier, like 30. Now this is borderline stylistic at this point, and yeah, let's go with something a bit more regular. Traditionally, if you want to be super safe and super correct in terms of the overall displacement, you will go with a value no higher than your wave height. But at this point, it's a bit too limiting, and yes, there is choppiness and sharpness to it, but I personally like to go a couple of points ahead, so maybe like something like 10 should be fine in this case. But we still haven't talked about our latest wind contribution, and this basically deforms the waves along the side of perpendicular to the direction of our wind. So our default value up until now in Waterline was always 2. It was hard-coded in the simulation. It was basically very difficult to change. But with this latest update, we've managed to get it stable and up and running, and you can basically modify it as you see fit. So let's see what happens when we set this to 0. Wow, our ocean now became really chaotic, and we are starting to see some of these pits actually. So what we're going to do is drop our wave amplitude down to maybe 3, and we can increase our height a bit more to like 9, maybe 8. Oh well, 7 is pretty good because we do have a floor on this map, and yeah, let's just roll with that. So you could see that a value of 7, if we actually set up the simulation to run at a decent speed, this is actually quite a chaotic sort of look. We can see that there is no real direction being taken into account when it comes to the way that the waves are moving. Let's just lower our wind speed a little bit. Yeah, because we're clipping through the floor a little bit on this map. And yeah, if we go down to something like 8, you can see like really sort of the ocean is boiling at this point. Now we could actually use all sorts of values like 0.1, 0.5. We could go into -1, but things will get a little bit weird, and beyond that, I think, yeah, the simulation will break down. It's not really designed to go for that. But in this case, well, if you're after a particular look, well, more power to you. But ideally, 0 is the lowest you should go. Next up, if we go back to 2, you could see that we are getting some sort of wind directionality. Let's just increase the speed to like 15 so we can get some waves. And then we can go to something like 4, 5, and at 8, we could see that the waves are becoming elongated. And maybe we could start bringing in some of that amplitude back in. 8. And yeah, we could see that our foam is now also being generated along with the shape of our new waves. And this is quite a nice tool because it really allows you to sort of personalize your ocean a lot more. Makes everything look a bit more unique, your own sort of set of waves. And in this case, these sort of elongated waves can be very useful for maybe a scene that's taking place somewhere more near a shore. Now, these aren't outright shore waves, but this is the sort of water interaction you would see around coastal areas, just sort of the shape being elongated along the shore. So for example, maybe something a bit more extreme like 12 or 15. Maybe 12 is a bit better. And yeah. Next up, we have wave height and wave choppiness, which we've kind of talked about. Wave tile is the way that these textures are tiled in world space. So for example, if you go 6,000, they become really massive. If you go something like 8, now at this point, when you start dealing with really high levels of tiling, you should probably start looking into increasing the FFT resolution. So let's go back to that. So let's just increase it to 1K here, and also change the render target scale. So whoops, 10024 here, and it's just gonna update a couple of things. And we're also going to do the same for our normal map. But but as we remember, we like to keep it doubled of what it is. 0.48. Perfect. So now we're getting a bunch more details, and maybe just increase the choppiness a little bit, and then the amplitude. 2.5, and yeah, this is looking pretty good. Now, something you should note is that at the moment the wave speed is being calculated in sort of simulation space, if you will. So if we increase this by a lot, it will appear that these waves are moving faster and faster. If we go to like our original value of like 3000, they're moving a little bit slower. Also, the deformations changed a little bit because these last wave height and wave choppiness are done in sort of texture space as well. But generally, if you're going with larger waves, maybe a bit too big in this case, you would also want to change the speed. So in this case, let's drop it down to 2, and we could see like a lot more realistic motion. And we're really pushing the stretching to this one, so yeah, something more like that. Let's just quickly cover our last one, wind direction, which is a little more self-explanatory. So these two values basically control our vector values, and they control, well, the direction of the wave. So 0, 0 gives us this, 1, 1, and so on and so forth. You basically rotate your sea like that. Next up, we do have some buoyancy controls that we're going to go over in a separate video. And finally, we have the foam simulation. So whether or not foam simulation should be generated, let's just change the scale of our ocean a little bit to something a bit more traditional. We have amplitude and texel size, and let's go with something a bit larger. Wave height 5 and 8. Maybe slow down the speed to 2.5, and this is pretty good. So right now we're not seeing it. Well, we actually are seeing a little bit of foam being generated, but for example, we want more foam, and foam Whitecap's power is basically how much foam is going to be generated. So at 0.3, not a lot. At 0.5, we're starting to see a little bit more foam. If we go to something like 1, we can see a lot of foam being generated. And then our next value beneath it, foam decay controls how long the foam that gets generated will stay on the map before it gets faded away. So at 10, we could see that the sort of foam decay is quite strong. If we were to lower it to something like 5, we could see that foam is being generated faster than it decays at certain points. Actually, in this case, it's actually quite good. But if we were to lower it to something like 2, yeah, this is what we're talking about. And that means that eventually our entire ocean will get covered in foam. Well, it's quite realistic, but maybe it's not something you'd like. But yeah, it is something that you could do. If we lower it enough down to 1. Now, as per our previous video, the look of the foam can be further tweaked from the foam parameters over here. We go over all of these in our older video on ocean materials. So yeah. Let's see if there's anything else we missed. Cool, we're pretty good. So let's go over another thing, animating the ocean. A bunch of these are actually available to our level sequencer. So what we just need to do is right click, go to, where was it now? Animation, level sequence. I believe in Unreal 5.1 this particular drop down menu looks a little bit different, but yeah, basically you just need a level sequencer, and we're gonna call this dynamic ocean, and we're just gonna open it up, make sure to drop it in our level and then open it. Cool. And now under track, we're going to say grab our ocean and things to track. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. We're going to see like a drop down menu with a bunch of stuff, and basically we're going to scroll all the way down and get the stuff that we need. Now we could use any of these, but we absolutely must have our dynamic ocean environment. This is the important one. Next up, I want to also animate the wind contribution and wind speed as well. We're not too worried about the foam right now because this is based on the other aspects of the simulation. So if the waves are small, well, the foam is not going to get generated, and so on and so forth. It kind of figures itself out at that point. But I'm also going to grab wind direction. It's going to be a vector, and click on any of these, and we have them all. Perfect. So for starters, I like to show time as seconds. Something like maybe change things over the span of, 10 seconds. Yep. And I'm basically gonna key all the values in here because I'm quite happy with the way they are. Except for dynamic ocean environment, so at 0, I'm going to turn it on and place a key for it here. Now what this does is this basically tells the ocean simulation we're going to be changing some of these parameters on the fly, and we need to tell it that because the ocean simulation is kind of comprised of two parts. The way we do it, there is at the beginning there's a step where you're building a sort of database of all of this wind sort of information. It's quite complex. And then we tell it basically, well, we have that, so we're no longer going to be calculating all of these. But right now we want to change these on the fly, which means that this sort of data needs to be calculated along with the change. So at 5 seconds, let's go to 5. We're going to set the wind contribution to something like 0. Gonna get the ocean to boil. And the wind direction, well, the wind direction isn't going to be too important at the moment, but then the wind speed, maybe we want to drop this down to 12 as well. And if we start moving, we could start seeing this change happening. And later on, towards 10 seconds, I want to get the wind contribution. Oh, actually, for the sake of demonstration, let's set it to 8 seconds. I want to get the wind contribution all the way up to 8. And the wind direction, I want it to be 0, 0, 1. Yeah, this is pretty good. So we're going to key the entire thing. And wind speed, let's drop it to something like 8, just so we have even more variation of variables. Now, between 8 and 10, I'm no longer interested in changing these variables. So to save on performance, I'm going to also disable the dynamic ocean environment at this point. So drop a key and set it off. Now at this point, the line becomes red, and these sort of extra calculations are no longer being done. Now we do need them over this period of time here and this period of time here, so we can get a nice smooth transition. And now you could see that when we move the slider, the ocean changes as we intended it. So it's becoming, the waves are getting smaller and more chaotic, and then we want them to get larger and more sort of rotated as well. So yeah, this is pretty much all there is to know about the way we do our ocean simulation in Waterline, and hopefully you understand a bit more about it now yourselves. So yeah, go make awesome things.